Aloha and welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Breakout Room on Core Conversation on Climate Change and Communities today at the East West Center Alumni Conference. My name is Dr. Victoria Keener, and I'm a Senior Research Fellow here at the East West Center, where I work with physical and social scientists and diverse sectors and communities in Pacific Islands, researching climate change, variability, and adaptation. Climate change is already having and will continue to have significant impacts on islands. Across the region, average air temperatures and nighttime temperatures are already rising. Rainfall patterns are changing, and extreme rainfall and flooding are increasing. Sea level rise and ocean temperatures are rising as well, and storms are changing track and becoming more intense. The impacts of these changes are wide-ranging, affecting built infrastructure, habitat and biodiversity loss, more frequent coral bleaching, changes in fishery dynamics, coastal erosion, food security, and human health. The science and adaptation work that need to be done to minimize negative impacts on communities that have been made the most vulnerable can seem overwhelming. But sustained collaborations with resource managers, planners, conservation organizations, and community groups has been shown to be an effective way to better incorporate future climate risks into planning and policy. You can look at some more detailed climate trends and impacts in the recent Pacific Islands Regional Climate Assessment, or PERCA, report series we're releasing with the East West Center at a link that I will share in the chat box. While my background is in hydrology and climatology, the work that our research team does is interdisciplinary, applied, and developed in partnership with groups on the ground that best know their communities and the work that needs to be done. These partnerships have introduced me to people doing critical climate work in the region, two of whom I have the pleasure of introducing you to today for this core conversation. Johnny Hadley is the Chief of Administration and Planning in the Pohnpei State Government in the Federated States of Micronesia, as well as the Child Protection Coordinator at the Department of Health and Social Affairs. I met Johnny when he reached out looking for local projections of future climate to help him better understand and plan for drought, flooding, and human health impacts in FSM. The FSM has a forward-looking joint climate and hazard action plan, and it was immediately clear that Johnny was thinking ahead about how to best plan for emerging climate risks. Soon after, we invited him to join us at an island health and climate change adaptation workshop held at the East West Center. Johnny has a degree in economics from the University of Hawaii and has expertise in human rights advocacy, health interventions and outreach, and community advocacy and outreach. Welcome, Johnny. Our other invited speaker is Dr. Supin Wongbusarakum, who earned her PhD in human geography from the University of Hawaii and received a certificate in international leadership from the East West Center. I've met Supin in several roles over the years, from reading her scholarship on fisheries and natural resource management in the region, and also as a very skilled potter. She was actually my teacher for a wheel pottery class in Honolulu, although I'm sure that my pottery did not make an impression on her. She is currently in Cambodia, working as International Communities Fisheries Officer with the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. Since 2005, she has both led and supported projects related to establishing and strengthening social objectives in natural resource management. She was the first senior social scientist with the Worldwide Office of the Nature Conservancy and the leader of a multidisciplinary team with the Pacific Islands Fisheries Science Center of the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Supin is committed to improving human well-being while achieving environmental objectives and a strong advocate of applying social science in integrated monitoring and actively engaging local communities at all levels in project planning. Thank you for being with us today, Supin and Johnny. And Supin, I will now turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. It's good to be reminded of my different roles. I am in Cambodia and miss pottery greatly. So currently, I am working as International Community Fisheries Officer with the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, or FAO. I am in the program for sustainable and inclusive growth in the fishery sector in Cambodia. So as some of you might know, the main aim of FAO is to assist governments to develop policies, programs, projects to achieve food security, to reduce hunger and malnutrition. We strive to develop agriculture, fisheries, forestry sectors, and to use the different environmental and natural resources in a sustainable manner. The objective of the particular program that I'm working for is to support the royal government of Cambodia in achieving its long term vision of social and economic development, food security, and poverty reduction, as initiated by the fishery reforms and in the National Strategic Development Plan. My specific task is to provide technical assistance and capacity building to the Fisheries Administration and the team on project implementation to help improve capacity to strengthen fishery management at the community, district, provincial, and national levels, and to strengthen governing institutions. My work really doesn't focus on the competition between nature and people, but we try to realize the condition that help balance, or some people might call this win-win, between environmental health and community well-being. The most important part of what I'm doing now is to support the communities as well as the government in the capacity to co-manage natural resources and to improve sustainable livelihoods. Co-management has been shown in many parts of the world to be a desirable tool for fisheries management, where stakeholders such as community or non-governmental organizations serve as critical partners. These different stakeholders share roles and responsibilities for protecting local resources. I myself, having led capacity building program to apply ecosystem approach to fisheries management, I'm continuing to use this approach. Simply put, the ecosystem approach to fisheries management is an alternative, holistic way of managing resources with the goal to balance biological health and, as I said before, human well being through good governance. It involves multiple stakeholders, multiple sectors, and naturally, sometimes we have competing objectives, and it requires stakeholders to discuss and work through the differences in the interest. It also requires different level of management. And among all these approach to ecosystem management, climate change is a cross-cutting issue. You might ask, what is my next big question? The big next question is related to adaptive capacity of communities that are being impacted by climate change. My question is, how could we strengthen the capacity to prepare for, to adapt, and to become more resilient? What are the innovative solutions that are place-based, meaning that it's locally, environmentally, and socio-culturally appropriate, and at the same time make use of modern climate science to proactively prepare the communities to face situations that will be different from the past, and probably some of them will be unprecedented. Clearly, many communities, especially here in the Pacific Island region, we have gone through history of successfully coping with extreme events. This might be natural disasters such as cyclones, extreme droughts, floods, and there's much learning coming from the local coping mechanism that can be used. At the same time, our climate science is providing important predictions, something that we didn't know as we experienced the past, but they are coming up. My big question would be how we could combine these different sets of knowledge, whether it's local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, citizen science, or Western science, and then work collaboratively to prepare for the most difficult and challenging future that climate will bring. This is so that we can minimize the negative impact and at the same time can materialize possible opportunities. How do we not undermine the place-based knowledge? How could we promote and pass this kind of place-based knowledge and the learned coping mechanism to the younger generations? How we could include Western science? How we could be mainstream climate issue into all levels and sectors? Thank you.
All right, Supin, thank you so much. Super interesting to hear about your work there. You talked about prioritizing resilience and trying to adapt to climate change. I was just thinking, sometimes the smallest places, often the smallest places, can feel the biggest impact when it comes to climate change, right? I'm thinking of
Right.
Pacific Island countries. What would be the priority for those small island states, like the FSM, the Federated States of Micronesia, to cope and to adapt to these climate change policies?
Mm. Thank you for that question, Remy. I think there are different things, but here I'm going to mention three priorities that I believe need to be considered. The first one, I believe it is really critical to give climate change priority and mainstream it into our efforts. And this is, whether it's natural resource management, whether it's agriculture, fishery, conservation, community development, and natural disaster mitigation prevention. Government and community leaders need to take active role, actually proactive roles, to support efforts to incorporate climate change consideration into any type of planning and policy development. And I think this is important. Climate change issues should not be competing with other sectors or other priorities, but it should be mainstream into them. The second thing, and this is something that I would say is my main concern, having worked with small island states and being in the field, working with the communities, the concern is related to livelihood vulnerability. From my own research studies, and as well as from others who have done a lot of study in the Pacific Islands, we know that Pacific Islanders are very adaptive. This is how we have survived being on small island, being self-reliant, and so on. But yet, at the same time, most of our livelihood are nature-based, natural resource-based, and they are also dependent on weather and climate. Nowadays, the alternative cash income generating activities are limited. And if we want to build these alternative or supplementary livelihood, it's not just the conversation or the framework of alternative livelihood development or sustainable alternative livelihood development, but really it requires new infrastructure, new type of knowledge, new resources, capital, and assets. So what are the innovative way for us to materialize and diversify the livelihood into less natural resource dependent or less climate sensitive options? How do we support place-based, socially, culturally relevant options? How do we build partnerships that will also include private or even have private sector, taking a part of leading into some of building alternative livelihood? And how do we strengthen public-private sectors so that new livelihood can be developed and sustained, and yet the islanders can still maintain their self-reliant? This is, I think, a critical and challenging question that we have. How do we focus on the strength and core assets of the people, instead of adopting all type of outside technology machine to do the work? Really, people on the island have assets, but how could we bring the other things and enabling conditions so that they can cope with climate change and be less dependent on resources that are being impacted by climate? Another thing that I can think of in the Pacific Island regions, and all of us, all the alumni who have lived, work in the Pacific Island region, I'm sure that you notice this. Social network or social networking is one of the most valuable assets that we have. And the social networks have been helping us dealing with any kind of challenges. It helps us in the time of difficulty, in the time of disaster. People learn from their network. People are supported by network. My question is, how would we expand this social network, the ohana that we call in Hawaii? How could we expand this ohana so that scientists or the state or the national government can be a part of this ohana, and we all can work together towards the really challenging situation that climate change is bringing to us? So let me stop there. Thanks.
All right, great. Supin, thank you. I think we have 1 or 2 more minutes. If you don't mind, I just want to ask you another question. Just in all of the work that you're doing right now, we're talking about all the negative stuff about climate change. But what's exciting to you? What do you look out into the world and you say, that is so fun, that's so exciting, that's our future? What's in your reality?
My background is in social scientist. I kind of have my feet on both world, natural science as well as social science. I started a little bit more towards natural science, and I became so interested in the culture, the people, the life. And I became more and more, and now I think people call me social scientist. But what I found really exciting is what type of opportunities that climate change bring
Hmm.
to really force us among all the different disciplines to work together, because climate change is overwhelming. Natural science alone cannot fix it. Climate science alone cannot do it. Social science alone is not adequate.
Hmm.
So it's just really exciting, not only for the multiple disciplines to come and collaborate in order to find innovative solutions and do things that we haven't done before, but also it kind of broaden us to stop thinking about our own sector and our own work and make sure that what we do can be collaborative with what other people do, what other sector do. And at the same time, this is no longer about local governing or international governance, because climate is everywhere, internationally, locally. And at the same time, it requires people to move and to have this conversation globally and yet act locally. So I think if there's one thing that brings people together to work to strengthen our humanity, it is climate change. I think that part of it is exciting.
Yeah, people say that there are opportunities in challenges, right? And so you're basically outlining that. We just have to think out of the box and not think of it as a negative, but there's a silver lining that we can take an opportunity there. And to your point, you said collaboration many, many, many times. We're going to be heading into breakout rooms very quickly after we hear from Johnny Hadley. But that is your opportunity. Everyone here is opportunity to talk about how you guys can work together and share experiences. All right, so let's go ahead and bring in Johnny Hadley. We have him on a pre-recorded video. He is the Child Protection Coordinator for the Federated States Department of Health and Social Affairs. So let's bring him in, and then we're going to do breakout rooms after that, and everyone will have a conversation. All right, here's Johnny.
And hello, everyone. My name is Johnny Hadley, and I'm from Tonle in the Federated States of Micronesia. As an alumni of East West Center, I've been asked to share progress of my work and why it is important. Um, so I'm really excited and happy to say that as the National Child Protection Coordinator, it is a new program that we're working on. The government just recently established program within the Department of Health and Social Affairs to develop activities and safe programs to look at safety and rights of children, child protection. So I'm very excited um, that we are finally looking at addressing the challenges of Micronesian children, especially since our country became a party to the International Convention on Children's Rights way back in the early 90s. So there's a lot of exciting things to share about that. There's also a lot of challenges because it's a new program. We also have to factor in the fact that FSM is one of the has a lot of outer islands, and so that in itself, it is again challenging and exciting at the same time. But we also have to be mindful that in the FSM we have four states. We all speak four different languages. We have four different traditional practices, and I think that's what make FSM one of the unique Pacific Island country. In that respect, um, there's a lot of um, things to learn from other Pacific Island countries as well as from our partners and donors, specifically from the United States, since we have this agreement with them where they provide technical and financial assistance in return for strategic influence over the country. So again, I have a lot of experience working in the government, but this is kind of the first time that I'll be looking at, developing and starting a new program, and I'm very excited about that. I look forward to working with our local partners, regional and international. Hopefully, in the future with East West Center, who knows? Maybe as an alumni, we'll be able to collaborate on programs that will look at protecting our children. Um, and because this venue or this platform is specific to climate change, as the protection coordinator, one of the specific areas that we will be looking at has to do with the protection of children against the changing of climate. So I'm very excited about that. We are just getting started in that area. Um, there's a lot of moving parts, but again, hopefully with our local partners and collaborators and regional and international stakeholders, will be able to uh, string up, if you will, something that will be specific for the FSM in the local context, and at the same time meeting the obligations of our government, both at the regional and at the international level. So again, I'm happy and excited to be here, and I hope everyone will have the same experience as I do. Thank you, Kalangan, and mahalo.
All right, great. Thank you again to Johnny and to Supin. Hope you learned something interesting or got the creative juices flowing that you might want to share in terms of the work that you're doing with what they're doing as well. And now is the time to share that. It's time for the breakout rooms. So we're all going to take a trip. Basically, we're going to be moving into breakout rooms. And in just a second, right on your screen, you'll see a black box pop up. And that will say the words join the conversation. It'll ask you to confirm your video and your audio. Basically, it's all preset. You don't need to do anything there. Just click let's go, and that'll magically transport you to your breakout room. So on your screen right now, you see breakout right there. And so for 15 minutes, everyone will have the chance to speak and discuss these questions that you see on your screen. What's happening in your community? What's working? What's possible, etc. Now, in your room, you're only going to have 6 people in it. So there'll be very small discussion rooms so people have a chance to share and to listen. 6 new friends from the Ohana here. Now, these are all your fellow East West Center alumni. They're also totally random. So when you get people in there, no one is choosing who's going to be in there. So it'll be a little bit of a surprise. And so definitely introduce yourself as well, where you're from and what your background is. All right, and when you're in the breakout session, again, try to follow those questions. They'll appear there, and you'll have a guide to discuss that. You'll see the 15-minute countdown on your screen at the bottom. And then when we're close to ending, you'll get an announcement that the breakout rooms will then be closing. Now, one housekeeping note, because you'll all be in your small little groups, once inside your breakout room, please remember the number of your breakout room, or at least one other person inside your breakout room. Now, the reason we say this is because in case you get lost, you lose your connection, and you have to head back to the main stage, you can tell people, okay, my breakout room was number whatever, or I remember this person was in my breakout room. So then the staff will be able to say, oh, okay, we know where that person is. We'll send you back to that room. So that'll be for the next 15 minutes or so. So go ahead and click into the breakout room, and then we'll all see you over there and enjoy your conversations. All right, guys, go for it. Great. All right, guys, welcome back. Hope you had a good conversation in those breakout rooms. And also, hopefully, you got a chance to use the photo booth there. You might have seen that there's a photo booth that you could take photos of your group there. If you didn't get a chance to do it then, you'll have the opportunity to do it the next time around when we do another core conversation breakout session tomorrow. All right, now is time for the Q&A, and we're going to bring Supin up here to have a conversation about climate change. I just want to ask you all, go ahead and put your questions, if you have them, into the Q&A chat on your screen. Again, the Q&A is on the right-hand side of your screen. The white area, you'll see at the top there's a chat, and then there's Q&A. You put your questions in the Q&A. We've got a couple in there, and I know some of you are putting it in the main chat. If you do that, that's fine. We'll look around there as well. We just don't want to miss your questions also. All right, so the first one, the eager guy, Dr. Richard Velstek, he has a question, Supin, for you. I think let's go ahead and bring Supin up, and we can have a conversation there. All right, great. Supin, thanks for joining back up again. So from Dr. Volstek, Supin, he's asking, can you please give the current status of Tonle Sap? He's worried about this because it's a major source of fish.
Yes, sure. Although I'm not an expert, in terms of the status of Tonle Sap, I just started to do my current work in Cambodia about 2 months ago. Literally moved over here from Honolulu. But I had an opportunity to do a few missions last week visiting Tonle Sap. So this question came in timely. Tonle Sap has a lot of challenges. Some of you might not know what it is. It is a huge lake in Cambodia where a lot of livelihood is dependent on, related to fishery. There's also a very unique ecosystem called flooded forest, meaning that the forest, has high amount of water at a certain time of the year, and it serves as habitat, for both nursery, for fish brood to develop there. So the problem with Tonle Sap nowadays, of course, it's not only pollution, but the bigger problem is the decreased amount of water, which is being impacted by multiple factors, including development of water, development of blockage of water flow, which now related to international issue or regional issues such as the huge dam building, because Tonle Sap is a part of the larger water body, which is the Mekong River. And as you know, Mekong River go through different countries, and a lot of dams are being built or have been built. And with a decreased amount of water, it means that the flooded forest is not flooded, as much as it used to be, which means in turn that a lot of species are dependent as a habitat for those areas, then suffer. And in turn, the people's livelihood, they are dependent on fishery, is suffering. And Tonle Sap is a system where it's a freshwater system, and a lot of fisheries in Cambodia come from there. So we have quite a bit of challenges, in terms of how it is right now and what we can do. There's also combined with this sounds like a oxymoron, but we have a lot of issue with fire in the flooded forest. So people set fire in order to clear land during the drier season, and that also has a huge impact of destroying the forest.
Yeah. One thing that I've been looking at, reporting out here for CBS News and in the past, with China, you talk about dams. China just came to mind, right? Because that country is the one building all of these dams for its own, resource sustainability to try to make sure that its economy grows, etc. But I hate to be a downer, but it seems like there's no chance for them to change, right?
It's very difficult because of the competing demands. Dam definitely were built because of some of the benefits that people expect from dam, but at the same time, they definitely have huge consequences, and not only in the area where dam is visible, but way down the stream. So yeah.
All right, great. Thank you. We'll move to another question. And by the way, in the chat box, you can see that you can upvote questions if you like them. There's a little arrow that say like 2 votes, 1 vote, 1 vote. So if there's something that you like that you say, oh, hey, I like that question, I'll vote them up. You can go ahead and do that too. All right, cool. I'm going to just change here. All right. Let's see. So 2 here. As a fellow geographer, I appreciate your, this is coming from Dan Scollin, by the way. I appreciate your comments about interdisciplinary exchange and the value of social networks. What are your suggestions for sharing climate change observations and activities in our community? So suggestions for sharing your observations. How do you do that?
You mean share what is happening or climate predictions to the community, or just share information on the impact of climate in general?
The way the question is formed, any suggestions for sharing climate change observations?
Yes. Communities are in the front line. They observe and they feel the changes that are coming. But I think what communities need to be informed of is the predictions. Not only what they have observed, what is being predicted as coming up. People see, for example, coral reef turning white. People
Mhm.
see that it impacts the habitat of fish. People see that the sea level has rise in a way that it wasn't before. But I think what is important is for people to understand that these things might not recover, and it might got worse, and it might not it that the magnitude of what can happen in the future, which is now supported by climate science, it's not what people have experienced before. So I feel this kind of prediction and understanding, whether it's the amount of sea level rise, whether it's the devastating effect of ocean acidification or coral mass bleaching, should be shared. But at the same time, I don't think scientists should be allowed to just come in with the information and say this is what's happening, because definitely the local observation is really important. So I would always feel that when scientists share the information, it has to be, one, accessible to the community, and two, being humble in the way that it also integrate what people have seen at their site and what people observe. So I would stop there for this question. Yeah.
Yeah, local knowledge, taking that into account, of course, is important rather than people just flying in and saying, "Okay, we think this
Very
is
important.
what's best for
And it
you."
has to be accessible. A lot of time I talk to scientists and I'm like, give me 3 sentences instead of giving this whole list of data. Make it accessible to people. Very important. I think science communication is really critical in terms of sharing with stakeholders. We are not just talking about scientists and academia, people in academia. We are talking about people whose life is being impacted by changing climate, and they have to understand. They have to be able to access the information.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to have all the data from scientists, but I agree with you. And when I interview scientists and professors, I ask one question and they can go for 10 or 15 minutes, and I say, "Okay, that's a lot of information. It's good, but I love your suggestion. Bullet points, 3 things. What do we need to know?" And then also, for anyone considering this, knowing your audience, right? If your audience are other scientists, that's fine. But if your audience are, the regular Joes out in the world, you can't talk so much. You just have to say, okay, this is the most important thing. Maybe number 2, maybe number 3. Um, I like this question here. I'm going to upvote this myself, from Fauzia Taranum. I like this because it's a little bit of a positive spin on this. This is from Breakout Room 10. So climate change, says Fauzia, can be linked with a lot of anthropogenic activities, a lot of human activities, right? What efforts can be made to bring about the change? And are there already programs on bringing about behavioral change in people? So I think the focus here is how are we changing human behavior to guide people to be, I guess, more respectful or more sustainable. Before you answer, I'm just thinking, I've just been seeing a lot more people say, eat less meat, go vegan, for example. I will share that I love my meat, but I keep on thinking, okay, eat more salad at least. And anyways, that's an initial thought, but you can go deeper in this. How do we change people's behavior and then encourage them, not say that's bad?
Well, I'm going to say I'm answering this question honestly from my own personal view.
Yeah.
Well, if we talk about behavioral change, there's an organization, at least one big one that I know, that focus primarily on this. That's rare, and
Mhm.
all they do is about behavioral change. In my own observation, it comes through understanding, and people change because they understand that something has impact. And a lot of time people change because it has impact on something that they care. In terms of climate change, a lot of people talk about it, that, oh, why should I worry about it? It's not really that bad yet. So why would people change? People would change if they understand that it has impact to your son, it has impact to your daughters. Can you imagine that in 20 years, when your grandchildren, want to do something, they first have to check climate report, a daily climate report, to see how it is. Can they go out today? Can they do certain water activities today? If you are in a sector like agriculture, how is the climate this year for your crops? It is something, that their own future generation, their family, their children, their grandchildren would have the consequences. And I think that kind of wake people up. This is not just about you. It's about somebody you care deeply. Another thing that I think would, and also this is totally a personal opinion,
Sure.
there are people who would not learn and would not care. And that is when rules, laws, and regulations come in, because you cannot change people by just building knowledge and making people care. But also sometimes you have to force people to do the right thing, and if they don't do it, there are negative consequences that they have to go through. So yeah, I would say laws. Yeah, the combination of laws, education, knowledge building, and making people aware of the larger impact they will have on what they care about or who they care about.
Yeah, I guess in what you're saying, with knowledge, you gently pull people along to encourage them. But if they don't change, then and potentially with rules and with fines, then you push people like carrots and sticks there. Great.
Completely
Um,
personal views, yes.
yeah, your personal point of view. Yes, yes. Um, Another question, talking about the environment, people who are critics of sustainability initiatives, not so much critics of that, but they just say, you know what, it costs a lot to do.
Mm.
For example, for countries and companies, big companies, they say this will hit our bottom line. We won't make enough as much money. Or with economies, it'll hit their GDP growth. Here behind me in China, it's one of the biggest, fastest growing economies for the past 25, 30, 40 years or so. And they still want to keep that going. But then there's, of course, pressure to try to make them, I guess, come in line with more sustainability initiatives. But that said, the United States is the second biggest polluter of carbon dioxide, right? So where is this balance and growth, balance between growth and environment? This is coming from Anupma Khanna. Please share your opinion on how developing nations can balance growth and environment.
This is a very difficult issue, and I experience it now daily, in
Mm.
Phnom Penh, where the city is developing drastically. Everywhere I go, I see new buildings being put in, road being constructed. Because why? People want to develop economically. I think the balance come when you put the question of sustainability into heart. There are short term and long term. And if we want to develop economically at the expense of the long term environmental impact, then we can do it, right? We can do it. We don't have to take concerns of anything else. But the question is also the loss, the cost of the loss of what would take probably more expenses to recover. And at the same time, the loss that might not be coverable. So when we talk about the balance, sometimes it's not just the balance at the moment, but also balance between now and the future generation. So again, you see, I'm talking about the children as being something that people would care about. But at the same time, this is again, when the cost, I'm sure the economists, can do their modeling and say, okay, 20 years from now, if we develop this way, at the cost of environment, what would we have to pay back in the future? And can we really bring back some of the things that have already lost? And a lot of time it's not only environment, because of the loss of the environment and natural resources come also with the loss of culture and what is related to the natural environment that we have been a part of, and that might not be replaceable. I see in my own generation the disconnect that we have from the natural environment because of the development. Can we now go back and be appreciative, or do we just turn on a sound machine to hear the water, the wave, the rain, the green forest, the frog? It's gone with the development when we think about it short term. So yeah, it's just all, again, policymakers who have to think about how do you balance not just the two, nature and people right now, but also now and the future.
Mhm. Supin, I smiled, but not in a happy way, I guess, when you talk about turning on sound machines to hear about nature. I have to admit, that's what I do every night before I go to bed. But, here in the urban jungle, I want to hear. I have this one on Headspace called Temple Rain, and it just takes me away where I just hear, rain falling on what I imagine to be, some natural scene, but I can't get there personally, right? So it makes me sort of sad, a little bit dystopian in that way that we're resorting to that. I'm curious, also always trying to be optimistic about these things. In your work or through your peers, is there a good success story for a developing nation that you know of that you see is pushing more towards the environmental side? Not so much sacrificing growth, but saying, okay, we have to try to find something more middle of the road.
Mm. This is a hard question for me to answer.
Mm-hmm.
And, I definitely have seen examples, and I wouldn't say it's an example of a nation, but I have seen good examples from communities.
Okay.
And it comes from communities being empowered and able to manage something by themselves for themselves and their children. I have seen that, even here in the Pacific, there are really strong community in Hawaii, in FSM, in Yap, in Palau. And at the level of nation, of course, you see some of the European country where conservation, climate have become, the top priority. They talk and they try to promote that kind of principles or thinking underlying their policy. They try to support by providing funds to other countries. But in terms of country they are developing, many of which are being in Asia,
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a difficult question, because of the competing objectives.
Yeah.
And whether we have a great example, I think spotty here and there, we are trying, but it is again the competing objective of development
Yeah.
that somehow make us blind side of what could cause a really enormous negative consequences in the future. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
really answer your question because it is a hard question to answer. Yeah.
Sure. And to be fair, it's the reality too, right? If there's nothing out there, then that's something that hopefully people can work towards to try to find that. I suppose if there was a solution like that, people would already be doing that, saying, "Oh, we can do the environment, but also not sacrifice economic growth there."
Mm.
And to be fair, the U.S. is not immune to criticism. The Industrial Revolution was such a horrible, polluting century. Now things are, relatively better, I suppose, but they could always be better in every single country. All right, so I'm getting a note from our organizers that we are running out of time. We'll take you off of the hot seat, Supin, let you have a rest. I did want to point out that there was one upvote here about having an international conference on climate change. I myself don't know this question, but this is a question for the East West Center themselves. And so they're seeing these questions too about any plans to do so. But, with the interest here, clearly our conversation with you, Supin, the past hour or so is just scratching the surface, and there's so much more here. But I think that's a great suggestion. So Ari Brara and everyone who upvoted that, thank you very much for that. All right, we'll go now to our next part of this session, and this is the innovation fellow video. So I want to say thank you for everyone for their good questions, and to Supin as well. We'll bid you goodbye now, and you can enjoy the rest of the conference as an attendee. We're going to end our core conversations with just a little bit of inspiration now. This inspiration is coming from our East West Center Innovation for Sustainable Development Fellows. It's a big phrase. So these are basically fellows for East West Center Innovations for Sustainable Development, going off of our conversation just now. These fellows, are young professionals and East West Center alumni. They're under the age of 40, and they work in the arts, they work in the environment, they work in education, they work in health, and they also work in disaster resilient sectors. So across a wide spectrum of things regarding sustainable development. So we've included some of their stories at the end of our core conversations to show how they're helping to change the world. Let's go ahead and roll that video. Take a look at this Innovation Fellow.
We're really at a critical time right now on the planet in terms of shark and ray conservation. Here in Indonesia, at least 40% of the species are threatened with extinction. If we don't do something now, they're going to disappear forever. Fortunately, we have this cadre of young Indonesian scientists who are very excited to go out and start shark conservation projects.
My name is Rafid Shidki. I'm the project leader of the Treasure Shark Project Indonesia. When you want to achieve the conservation objectives, you have to really understand the situations of the community themselves. The communities are actually willing to be engaged and also to participate in the process of this conservation work that we are doing.
Indonesia has been the world's largest shark and ray fishery for over 30 years. Dealing with that, of course, is a lot of effort, but we've really seen in the last 5 to 10 years a dramatic change here in Indonesia, and we've done that by focusing specifically on individual villages where you can really get traction. So as an example, in Raja Ampat, where they were able to see just how important these sharks and rays are to their tourism industry, we were able to get them to actually make an entire shark sanctuary across Raja Ampat, stop all shark fishing because of that value.
All right, great. Yep. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we have for the rest of the day after that amazing East-West Center Innovation Fellow video. You can learn more at tomorrow's session as well, by the way, too. So you see at the bottom of your screen, we've now blacked out core conversations because we've just wrapped that up. Next up, we're in the second session, starting that soon. The East-West Center today, preparing for the next 60 years. And then after that, to close out day one, we'll be doing reconnection rooms by decades. So to remind you of how to navigate, let's go ahead and put that graphic up on the screen again so that you know where we need to go. Remember, we talked about that hamburger, those 3 horizontal lines at the top left-hand side of your screen. It's where that event navigation in red is. It's just underneath that. So go ahead and click over that. And once you click there, then click the 2021 EWCA International Conference tab, and that'll head you back there. One quick note, now is the time for you to take a quick comfort break. We'll have a couple minutes there. You can use the bathroom. You can get coffee if you're still waking up, or if it's your evening and you're winding down, you could get a glass of wine if you need to. And in the main stage, when we head back there, we're going to have a cool stretch break, and it'll be a video done by East West Center students right on the campus of the East West Center. So click on over to the EWCA International Conference. Just click on that little hamburger, and we'll see you over there in just a few moments. See ya.